It was early July 2014, the kind of scorching summer where the desert heat seemed to shimmer in the air. David Miller, a seasoned outdoor enthusiast, had always dreamed of showing his wife, Karen, the more remote parts of the Mojave Desert, the places tourists never dared to go. That weekend, they packed their gear meticulously. 2 sleeping bags, a cooler full of food, a pair of folding chairs, and David's prized DSLR camera. According to friends, they were giddy with excitement as they set off, promising to be back by Monday afternoon. It was supposed to be just a short escape from the noise of the city. On Friday afternoon, David called his son Michael to let him know they'd reached a small town on the desert's edge. He mentioned they were topping off the gas tank and grabbing extra water just in case. That was the last confirmed contact anyone ever had with them. No texts, no photos, no social media updates. It was as if they had driven straight into silence. When Monday came and went without a single word, Michael grew anxious. By Tuesday morning, he contacted local authorities, who quickly began searching known camping spots. Helicopters scanned the rugged terrain from above while ground teams combed through dry creek beds and rocky hillsides. The search stretched over 50 square miles, but there was no trace of the couple, not even a tire track or a discarded wrapper. What made things even stranger was the GPS data from their phones. The last recorded location showed them leaving a well-traveled dirt road and heading toward an unmarked path that wasn't on any map. Search teams drove that route multiple times, but found nothing, no broken branches, no signs of a vehicle having passed through. It was as if the desert itself had erased them. Rumors started circulating in the nearby towns. Some believed they had simply underestimated the heat and gotten lost, their remains hidden somewhere in the vast emptiness. Others whispered about abandoned mining tunnels and forgotten military test sites scattered deep within the Mojave, places no one was supposed to go. And then there were the darker theories. That they might have crossed paths with someone who didn't want them coming back. The Mojave Desert has always had a reputation for swallowing things whole. Locals call it the land that keeps what it takes. Over the years, stories had circulated of missing hikers, vanishing off-roaders, and even a small charter plane that dropped off radar and was never found. David and Karen's disappearance seemed to slip right into that unsettling pattern. To outsiders, the desert looked empty and lifeless. But those who had lived near it long enough knew there were things out there, hidden in its miles of scorched earth, that no search team could ever truly find. Searchers reported an eerie stillness during the hunt for the Millers. It wasn't just the heat pressing down like a heavy blanket. It was the silence. No birds, no insects. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. More than one search volunteer admitted to feeling like they were being watched from somewhere, out beyond the dunes, though they could never say by who or what. The Mojave was an open space, yet it felt claustrophobic, as though its vastness was somehow closing in. The region they had been headed toward was particularly notorious. On old survey maps, it was marked only with faint contour lines, no trails or landmarks. Some said the area hid abandoned gold mines dating back to the 1800s. Their entrances half buried in shifting sand. Others claimed there were forgotten military testing grounds from the Cold War era, fenced-off areas with warning signs that had long since rusted away. Over time, these places had been erased from official maps, but locals insisted they still existed. That there were also darker rumors, the kind whispered over beers at dusty roadside bars. These stories spoke of isolated desert dwellers who lived entirely off-grid, people who had no interest in visitors, and who made sure they never left if they came too close. The police never officially acknowledged these tales, but a few retired deputies quietly admitted that certain spots were deliberately left unsearched, because they belonged to someone. Whether that meant squatters, criminals, or something else entirely was never made clear. As weeks turned into months, the desert gave up nothing. No scraps of clothing, no dropped tools, no signs of a campfire. Every lead seemed to dissolve into sand, every theory collapsing under the sheer weight of unanswered questions. People began to wonder if the Millers hadn't just vanished in the Mojave but had somehow vanished into it, absorbed by whatever secrets the desert had been guarding for centuries. For years after the disappearance, Michael Miller kept his parents' belongings boxed away in the attic. He told himself it was too painful to go through them, but in truth, he couldn't bring himself to face the possibility that every answer he'd ever wanted might be sitting in one of those boxes, or that there might be no answers at all. It wasn't until the summer of 2025, on the 11th anniversary of their vanishing, that he finally decided to unpack everything. Dust clung to his hands as he opened each cardboard container, sorting through old jackets, camping gear, and a camera tripod with a cracked leg dot at the very bottom of the largest box. Wrapped in a faded piece of cloth, Michael found something he didn't remember his father ever owning: a thick weathered leather notebook. Its cover was scarred with scratches, as if it had been dragged across stone. When he opened it, the first pages were filled with neat handwriting, lists of camping supplies, sketches of birds, and notes about desert landmarks. But the further he flipped, the stranger the contents became. The handwriting turned hurried, uneven, as though his father had been writing while on the move. Midway through the notebook, Michael came across a page that made his breath catch: a hand-drawn map. It wasn't like the clean, printed topographic maps he knew. This was rough, almost primitive, with jagged lines and symbols that didn't make sense. There were no names for roads or towns, only strange markings, a spiral, a set of crossed lines, and an X far beyond any marked trail. His father had drawn arrows leading to that X, but there were no explanations for what it meant. Then Michael reached the final page. It contained only a single line of writing in ink, so faded he had to tilt it toward the light to read it. "If you're reading this, don't go here alone." There was no signature, no date, no indication of who the warning was meant for, but Michael recognized the slant of the handwriting instantly. It was his father's. He could feel his pulse pounding in his ears. 11 years of nothing, and now this. He sat there for nearly an hour, the notebook heavy in his lap, debating what to do. Part of him knew he should hand it over to the authorities, let them handle it. But another part, the part that had been silently screaming for answers for over a decade, wanted to follow the map himself. As he traced his fingers over the faint pencil lines, he couldn't shake the feeling that his father had left this behind for him, and that maybe, just maybe, it was meant to lead him to the truth. Michael left before sunrise. The map from his father's notebook folded neatly into the breast pocket of his jacket. The highway out of town was empty at that hour, lit only by the occasional flicker of neon from all-night gas stations. As the miles rolled by, the buildings thinned, then disappeared entirely, leaving only open desert in every direction. The air outside shimmered with early heat, and the road stretched ahead like a ribbon into nothingness. He couldn't shake the feeling that with every passing mile, he was driving deeper into a place he wasn't meant to see. Eventually, the pavement ended, just as the map had indicated. Michael turned onto a dirt track that looked barely wide enough for a single vehicle. Dust swirled in his rearview mirror, hanging in the still air, long after he passed. With every bump and jolt, the map felt heavier in his pocket. He had brought extra fuel, food, and water, but the more the landscape around him changed, becoming jagged, alien, and silent, the more he began to wonder if that would be enough. Hours passed without a single sign of life. No houses, no power lines, not even the distant sound of an airplane. It was the kind of silence that felt unnatural, like the world itself had gone dormant. The track eventually narrowed into what barely qualified as a trail, winding through rocky outcroppings and stretches of soft sand that threatened to trap his tires. Several times, Michael had to stop, step out into the blazing heat, and check the map to make sure he hadn't strayed from his father's route. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the landscape took on a strange, almost unreal beauty. Shadows stretched long across the desert floor, distorting shapes into something otherworldly. That's when he saw it far in the distance, a faint metallic glint against the rolling dunes. It was small at first, like a trick of the light, but with every slow turn of the wheels, it grew more distinct. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled. He didn't need to guess what it was. Deep down, he already knew. Michael eased the vehicle forward, his heartbeat sinking with the crunch of tires over sand. The object ahead was half buried, its faded paint blending with the desert around it. He cut the engine, the sudden silence pressing in on him like a physical weight. The air was so still, it felt as though the desert itself was holding its breath, waiting to see if he'd take the final steps toward it. The closer Michael walked, the clearer the shape became. The vehicle was sun-bleached and ghostly, its once deep blue paint now reduced to a patchy, powdery gray. Half the truck's body was buried under a wind-sculpted dune, as if the desert had been slowly trying to consume it over the years. The front windshield was spider-webbed with cracks, the kind that suggested not just age, but force, as though something had struck it from the inside. The driver's side door hung slightly ajar, groaning faintly in the breeze. Michael could see the keys still dangling in the ignition, swaying just enough to catch the fading sunlight. Inside, the cab was littered with sand, as though storms had funneled it in over the years. 2 dusty backpacks lay on the passenger seat, their zippers rusted shut. There was no sign of food, water, or any attempt to set up camp nearby. Almost as if whoever had been here had left in a hurry. Michael's breath caught when he noticed the footprints. They surrounded the truck in uneven circles, overlapping, and smudged but still distinct against the shifting sand. What made his skin crawl was that they weren't old, weathered impressions. They were sharp, defined, recent. The size of them varied, some larger, some smaller, and none seemed to lead away from the truck in a clear direction. Instead, they seemed to stop and start randomly, like whoever had made them had been pacing, or waiting. He walked slowly toward the rear of the vehicle, half expecting to see something or someone emerge from behind it. The truck bed was empty except for a scattering of brittle leaves, though he couldn't imagine where they'd blown in from. There were no trees for miles. A strange metallic scent lingered in the air, faint but unmistakable, and it seemed to cling to the inside of his nose. That's when he noticed something else. Faint scratches along the truck's side panel, low, to the ground. They weren't made by rocks or branches. They looked deliberate, almost like marks from metal tools or claws. Michael took a step back, scanning the endless horizon, but the desert offered nothing, no movement, no sound, only the truck, sitting there like a relic from another time, with a silence that seemed just a little too heavy. Just a few steps from the truck, half buried in the sand, something caught Michael's eye, a sliver of weathered wood jutting out at an angle. At first, he thought it was just a piece of debris, maybe part of an old fence post. But as he brushed away the dry, powdery sand with his boot, more of it emerged, revealing a roughly cut wooden board. The grain was split and dry, and deep gouges ran across its surface as though someone had carved into it with a blunt blade. The word was crude, but unmistakable. Leave. The letters were uneven, hacked into the wood with an urgency that made them look almost frantic. The edges of each cut were blackened, as if someone had burned them after carving, maybe to make the warning last longer against the desert sun. Michael crouched closer, his hand hovering over the sign, unsure if touching it would disturb something he shouldn't. What unsettled him most wasn't just the message, but the fact that he had seen old photographs of this very area from the 2014 search. In those photos, the truck was visible in the background, half buried even then, but the sign wasn't there. That meant someone had come back here long after the original disappearance, someone who wanted to send a message, and had gone to the trouble of planting it right next to the miller's vehicle. Michael glanced around, the desert suddenly feeling smaller, more enclosed. The silence was oppressive now, heavier than before, pressing down on him as if the air itself didn't want him there. Every instinct told him that the sign wasn't just a warning for strangers, it was directed at him. Yet, the footprints around the truck suggested whoever had left it might not have gone far. The thought made the back of his neck prickle. The wood was old, but the sand around its base had been disturbed recently, as though someone had driven it into the ground not long ago. He followed the faint lines in the sand, hoping for a trail, but they vanished only a few steps away, erased by the wind or perhaps intentionally covered. The sign stood there like a sentinel, mute but commanding. And for the first time since he arrived, Michael felt a very real urge to obey it and walk away. Michael finally turned back toward the truck, telling himself he'd only check the inside one more time before leaving. He opened the glove box, expecting the usual old registration papers. Maybe a flashlight, but instead, a small black camera slid out into his palm. Its body was scratched, one corner dented, but the memory card slot was still intact. The battery, however, was completely dead. He slipped it into his pocket, the weight of it strangely comforting and ominous at the same time, as if it held not just images, but answers. Standing up, he scanned the horizon again. The desert seemed endless, yet it felt like it was closing in, the way a room feels smaller when someone else is in it. He could see no movement, no shapes on the dunes, but that didn't mean he was alone. Every shift of wind against his ear made him pause, straining to hear something beneath it. There was nothing at first. And then, faintly, something else. It was a sound so soft, he thought he might be imagining it. Voices. Not shouting, not calling, but low, overlapping whispers, speaking in a language he didn't recognize. The tone wasn't urgent, but it was steady, as if the speakers knew exactly where they were and exactly what they were saying. Michael turned in a slow circle, trying to pinpoint the source, but the sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. Carried by the air itself. The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence so deep it seemed to press against his eardrums. Michael's pulse quickened, his body instinctively tensing, ready for something. The shadows around the dunes had grown longer now, creeping toward him like dark fingers. He felt an almost magnetic pull to look back at the sign, but resisted. Forcing his eyes forward toward the faint line in the sand that marked his own tire tracks back to the trail, he began walking toward his vehicle. The camera in his pocket. Like a heartbeat, he could feel through the fabric. Every few steps, he glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see movement near the truck or worse, closer. But the desert remained still, the kind of stillness that hides things in plain sight. Michael didn't run, but each step was quicker than the last. Whatever was out here, he knew one thing for certain. It hadn't wanted his parents to leave. And it might not want him to either. As the desert stretched out endlessly behind him, Michael didn't dare look back again. Only when he reached his own vehicle did he finally unlock the door, slide inside, and slam it shut as if that thin metal shell could protect him from whatever might be watching. His hands shook as he started the engine. The distant truck now nothing more than a shrinking speck in his rearview mirror. That night, in the safety of his apartment, he plugged the camera into his computer. The memory card contained only one folder, dated 11 years ago. Inside were a series of still images, each darker and blurrier than the last. The final photo froze him in place. It was taken from inside the truck, the windshield cracked exactly as he'd seen it. In the background, through the fractured glass, shapes were standing in the sand. Too far to see clearly, but close enough that he could count them. There were 11 of them, and every single one was facing the camera.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.